Hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. We are welcoming Dr. Jane Scarrow again. She already taught a couple of Yo Sigo Publicando courses. And Dr. Jane Scarrow is a field professor at the Department of Mineralogy and Petrology of the University of Granada. And today we are having the first part of a two-part course titled Engaging the Public, Strategies for Effective Science Outreach and Research Communication. So thank you all again. And Jane, we are ready whenever you are.
Okay, thanks very much, Vicky. Thanks everybody for joining, and thanks also to Vicky and Nicholas for the invitation to talk about outreach and effective research communication. As Vicky mentioned, this is a two-session course, and the idea is that I'll be talking today, presenting some information and some ideas, and then next week there'll be an opportunity for people to present their own outreach activities. And if you're interested in doing that and participating in that session, please make a note of my email address here and get in contact with me so that we can organise the session for next week. Okay, so I'd like this to be a fairly informal session, if possible. Please chip in with your contributions, your ideas at any point. Hopefully Vicky can manage that. I presume people can open their microphones and make comments or raise their hands. I've got them sharing my screen, so I can't see any of those indications. So if Vicky, you can manage that and let me know. But really, sure. I'm very interested to hear your contributions and ideas as well.
I'll be here, Jane, so if anyone wants to leave a comment on the chat box or raise their hands to comment, I'll be here to manage that.
Perfect, thanks. If you could let me know, that'd be great. Just interrupt as we're going along. That's fine, because obviously I can't see that if I'm sharing my screen. So the outline of the talk today is I'm just going to be a brief introduction, talk a little bit about my experience, my background in doing science outreach specifically, and sort of why I'm here giving this talk for Yo Sigo Publicando. Then we'll pass on to some information about what you might want to take into consideration when you're planning your outreach activities, focusing particularly on the aims of the outreach and the content that might be included. Then we'll look at some effective approaches for outreach, and then move on to think about, sessions going forward. So how can we use feedback to both from the participants, from the researchers, the volunteers, and also from the public that are involved to improve our research and our outreach. And that might be, for example, if you're participating in a multi-day event, that might be during the event that you'll make modifications, or it might be that the following year in Science Week, you might do things in a slightly different way depending on the feedback. And then taking that feedback and using it as one of the resources for reflection, thinking about the impact and the effectiveness of the outreach activities based on those initial aims that you're defined in the planning stage of the process. And finally, we'll just ask ourselves the question, so what? So what in the sense of what is the importance? What's the importance of the research that I'm doing? What is the potential relevance to the general public? And so how can we effectively communicate that? And finish up with a summary. So very briefly, I'm an English geologist. I work at the University of Granada. I've been here for over 20 years now in the Department of Mineralogy and Petrology, as Vicky mentioned. And my outreach experience has principally been here at the University of Granada, but also very much during the time that I had 2 research stays in the United Kingdom at the University of East Anglia. And I'm going to be sharing some of those activities we did during my time there. Okay, so I thought I'd start off just with a brief summary in the context. I imagine that some of the participants will be here from the University of Granada, what they say about outreach, or as we say in Spanish, divulgación. And they have this new plan that was designed in January 2022, talking about the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology. The outreach is done in that context. And the idea is the fundamental aim for the research and outreach at the University of Granada in this context to improve and increase training, culture, and scientific knowledge of citizens, whether that be school children, adolescents, or other people within the general population, and to transfer knowledge generated at the University of Granada to society. And the ways that this is done at our university, at least, is through the communication and dissemination of research results. That might be through channels such as University of Granada Divulga or Canal UGR, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Then there are various activities such as Science Week, which is held in November, the PISA activities, which are connections between researchers at the university and students in secondary schools as a brief introduction to research projects for them. We have Researchers' Night in September, which is in the centre of the city, and then other activities such as physics for the visually impaired, playing with science, etc., that are listed here. In addition to these activities, the university provides advice and training of personnel in outreach for science and technology through workshops, and also there's research into the process of social diffusion of research and study results. And I've left a link there. If anybody's interested in seeing that and seeing more detail about that information, you can connect to the link that you've got there for the university. So that's what we do here. And my first question, because as I understand from Vicky and Nicholas, we've got people from other universities from abroad as well. Would anyone like to comment about what goes on in your own universities? This is an open question to the group here. Maybe people that are actively involved in science or humanities research outreach might want to share their experiences, how they've undertaken some of their work.
Feel free to comment on the chat box if you like. I'm not sure if everyone here today is from University of Granada, so
I imagine not.
Your comments.
Well, let's move on then, if people are a little bit shy at the moment, but there are several questions come up in my presentation, so I hope that people will find the interest or the courage to participate and share their own experiences. We'll come on to those. Okay, so if maybe this is an indication that people don't know what the policy is in their universities, so that could be maybe the first task related to this presentation, is to find out what the policies and the support that's available for you is in your own universities. Okay, so I'm now going to share a little bit of what I've done in recent years. When I was in the UK with the Scarrow de Madariaga Fellowship, I was involved in organising the primary science activities for students at a school in Norwich in the UK. And these activities were based around the national curriculum. And I think that if you are going to get involved in schools research and outreach, you should really, tie that in with what's relevant, what's relevant for the teachers. So what we did, we worked with educationalists and we designed several class plans so that the teachers from other schools, not only the one that we worked in, could download this information. They could see what resources they needed, and they could see how they could fit that into an afternoon of science with their own primary school children within the context of what the national curriculum indicates should be taught. And we did all sorts of fun things. This was with a group, quite large group of 7 to 8 year olds, and we made metamorphic rocks out of chocolate chips. We looked at how soil might affect the plants that would grow based on the drainage properties of sand and clay. We made an erupting model volcano. And you can look at that information in the link that I've put here from the University of East Anglia, where you can download all the resources that we produced for that activity. So that was one thing in the context of younger children. Something else that I was involved in a little bit more recently was the Royal Society Summer of Science last year in London. And this is really one of the premier science outreach activities in the UK. And as you can see from the information here, over a period of 4 or 5 days, the Royal Society typically expects, and this is what we saw, around about 10,000 visitors to pass through the exhibition. So we were there with maybe 10, 15 other groups of scientists. And what we were focusing on was volcanoes. My research is into active and recent volcanic activity. And we were looking at the sight, smell, sensations related to volcanoes and how that fits in and how that is relevant to societies who live with volcanoes. And this is part of a much bigger project that's led by colleagues of mine, Jenny Barclay and David Powell at the University of Oxford and Bristol, respectively. And so we were interacting with the general public, with age groups from 3-year-olds through to university professors and everything in between. So it was really a case of mental gymnastics, thinking about how we would explain our research to the different age and background and ability groups in that context. But it was a lot of fun participating in that activity. And then finally, this is more of an invitation and an advert, really. In May, next month, here in the city of Granada, the department that I work at, Mineralogy and Petrology here at the University of Granada, is organising a Geolodia. This is something that's done by the Geological Society of Spain every year. And this year, we'll be looking at the rocks that are used in the building of the main buildings, streets, pavements within the city of Granada, both in the context of the traditional building materials and also the more modern building materials. So I invite you to all come along. It's completely free. You don't need to sign up in advance. We start at 10 o'clock in the morning in the Plaza de Brambla, and you can come along there from any point in the morning till 1:30. And that's on Sunday, the 12th of May. So we've got information if you want the link, but please do come along and join us and find out a little bit more about the geology of the city of Granada. So another question for you before we go into further to more information, specific information, is does anyone want to share that they actively participate in outreach? And if you do participate, why is that? What drives you? What's your motivation? Or also people who don't participate, why is it something that you're not interested in getting involved in? Maybe we can just, have some feedback from the group regarding those questions. You could also put information in the chat, and Vicky could read that out if you prefer.
For those who are connecting right now, feel free to leave your comment or open your microphone if you want to participate.
Absolutely.
Oh, we have a raised hand here.
Great.
Yes. Hello. My name is Julia, and I just wanted to comment on the reasons why I actually do outreach activities. I think in my case, it's mainly because my research is academic, but also a little controversial because of my methodologies. I am an anthropologist, and my thesis was an ethnographic and auto-ethnographic look into tattooing in Spanish society from a gender perspective. And so even though, of course, I write articles and I do things in academia, I think since I am linked to the tattooing community also in a personal and professional level, for me it was really important to just go to, I don't know, meetings and conventions, and actually any place where people would feel interested in listening to my research. So in my case, it's a mix between personal reasons and maybe professional as well.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. That's interesting, and that's something that I think, you know, it's something that's got a direct connection with society. So that's a very, you know, maybe easy way to engage people with an outreach activity.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Okay, if there aren't other comments, again, you know, maybe this is something for people to reflect on, whether they want to think about communicating their research results to the general public and how they might go about doing that. And if they don't want to, well, it's also something to think about going forwards. Okay, so let's move now into some suggestions, some advice related to undertaking outreach. First of all, starting with the planning stage. So it's absolutely critical when planning an outreach event to have some clear aims for the outcomes and the impact that you want to achieve with the time that you're going to dedicate to this activity. Because of course, you know, as we know, we're all short of time, we're all really busy, we have our classes, we have other obligations, we have our research, lab work, or whatever that might be. So if we're going to dedicate time to this, we really need to think that there's going to be some benefit coming out of it. And that's where you need to define the aims for the outcomes you want to achieve. Important in any context of interacting with the general public to do a risk assessment on the activity or the activities that are going to be undertaken. And that is something that should be structured through your own university. To make a greater impact, it's absolutely fundamental to collaborate with the local communities, whether that be local organisations and groups or schools in the area where you're targeting, so that you can make the connections, you get more people involved in the activity that you're organising. Once that's established and you've got what the outcomes or the aims of the outreach activity is, you really then need to find out from these local collaborations what the audience is like that you'll be interacting with in terms of both their knowledge level, their interests, what age groups you might be targeting. You know, it's very different explaining research results to 7 or 8 year olds compared to explaining it to a group of elderly adults. We need to think about how we're going to communicate, how we're going to target our messages based on who we're speaking to. Of course, you know, it's not always possible to control who you may have as an audience. In the context of Researchers' Night in the centre of Granada in September, the general public come along. In the Summer of Science Royal Society activity that we did, as I mentioned before, we're dealing with all sorts of people with all sorts of backgrounds, and that requires, you know, changing just as you're going along how you might communicate with one person or another group. In terms of communication, we need to think about accessibility and inclusion and diversity. And that's taken into account people's abilities, people's educational backgrounds, people's cultural backgrounds, and thinking about their perspectives to make the activity something that they feel is relevant to them, that they're participating in. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But this is, really fundamental if you want to connect with the audience that you're communicating to. Okay, another question for the group. And the idea here as well with these questions, and as I put here at the top, is that these can be prompts for you to prepare your own outreach activity that we're going to be looking at next week in the second session of this presentation. So what strategies would you use and what would you implement to ensure effective accessibility, diversity and inclusion in an activity that you organise? Now, people might want to answer that now, or you might want to reflect on that and think about that to include in the presentation that people are going to be contributing next week. I don't know if there are any comments regarding that in the chat, Vicky.
Not right now. So if anyone wants to comment on this, feel free to raise your hands or write on the chat box. You can also do that in Spanish, and we can translate it if you feel more comfortable expressing yourself in Spanish.
Absolutely. And we can have these, people can think about this and we can have a general sort of questions and answers at the end as well, if people want to come back to this. But the point here really is to emphasize that these questions that I'm putting in the presentation, these are things that you should be considering when you're planning outreach. Okay, let's move on. So here are some suggestions that you might take into account when you're planning outreach to ensure that it's open to all, that people don't feel excluded. First of all, the accessibility of the venues and the materials. Think about, is the area wheelchair accessible? Is the material that we're providing in multiple formats, such as large print, that some people might need to accommodate diverse needs of the audience? This community engagement that I was talking about before, connecting with local groups and schools to understand the specific needs and interests of the diverse audiences that might be being targeted. Think also not only about the audience, but think about the people that you're involving in the outreach. So the speakers and the organisers, they should also reflect the diversity within the community, and they should reflect underrepresented groups to draw them in, make them feel comfortable, and make them feel that it really is a space in which they can participate. So think about diverse representation within the organisation committee of outreach events. Language and communication, of course, has to be considered, and I've mentioned that already when I was talking about, the differences between presenting information to young children or to other groups. But in general, what we're aiming for is a use of clear, inclusive language, and if necessary, provide interpretation or translation services where possible. Of course, funds might be limited, but with the resources we have available now with Deeply and Google Translate, we can at least provide some sort of approximation of translations of material we're providing. In terms of inclusion, we should be considering sensory considerations. For example, participants with autism may have sensory sensitivities, and we may need to make adjustments related to that. Of course, if we're going to be inclusive, we need to think about financial accessibility, offering free or low-cost admission, if funds are available, potentially even offering subsidies to particular groups so that they can participate in the activities. Always thinking about cultural sensitivities, respecting people's cultural traditions and practices, and particularly providing opportunities for people to share their own experiences, their own perspectives. For example, if we take the case of the outreach event last summer at the Royal Society, that was looking at people's experiences and the interaction between volcanoes and society. Well, of course, it would be very different. The way to communicate with somebody that was coming into that activity from central London that didn't have any experience of living near volcanic activity, to communicating or conversing with somebody that was from one of the Caribbean islands, which we were looking at in the research, where maybe they'd been evacuated related to the activity on Montserrat, which went on from 1995 to 2010, or they knew of families or their family members that had been. So these are things that we need to know so that we can communicate effectively and respectfully and sensitively with the audience that we're engaging with. Other things that we can do, both within longer term outreach activities, but also thinking about going forward, is to ask for feedback and evaluation. Ask for the participants' opinions about barriers that they might have encountered and how they think that the outreach could be improved. And then coming back to the very beginning and the organising committee, training should be provided. Training should be provided in equality, diversity and inclusion to let us know what we should be taking into consideration when we're planning these type of events. So that's mentioned last, but it's maybe something that should come right at the beginning. So these are all suggestions that people can take forward to plan their own activities. Okay, thinking about effective approaches for outreach. Well, in my experience, one of the most important things that we can do when we're undertaking outreach is let other people share their experiences, whether that's little children telling you about the rocks that they found when they're on holiday, or whether it's somebody telling you how they experienced the first ashfall from the St. Vincent eruption on the Caribbean island. People, if you give them the opportunity, I find that they're very keen to share their own experiences, to relate what you're talking about to their own lived participation in similar events. To do this, we need clear communication, pitched at the right level for the audience that we're communicating with. Relatable examples are always really helpful to open up communication and conversations. Analogies that people can relate to. And maybe, for example, a person from London has no experience of volcanic activity and crises related to that, but they might have experience of severe storm events. So there are some, analogy that can be drawn between those two types of natural hazards. In terms of communication, it's also really important to be authentic. We're scientists, we're researchers, we're investigators. We're not answering all the questions. We're not, solving the definitive world problems in a particular area necessarily. We may be, which would be fantastic. But we have to be honest about the limitations and the uncertainties related to our research and related to our research results. And that's something that we need to think about, how we communicate to the general public. Other approaches that are really useful for engaging the communities are hands-on experiments. Everybody loves a good mini volcanic eruption. Interactive displays that people can connect with. Giveaways such as stickers, bookmarks, information that they can take away and either do the activities at home or find out more information. Polls that can be done on the day, people voting about whether one particular idea may be more important than the other. For example, in the sensing volcanoes, we had a little poll going on each day, whether it was sight, whether it was hearing, whether it was smell, that might be most important in detecting volcanic activity. So you can use your imagination how that might be relevant to your own work. And then QR codes. If people want more information, people love taking their phone and connecting to a QR code to get more information, background information about the outreach results. So those are just some ideas. And something for people here in this session to think about in terms of next week, when hopefully there's going to be some really nice outreach activities presented, or further into the future going on to do other outreach events. Something important to think about is what would be your hook activity if we're in the centre of Granada on a end of September Friday evening, and there are 150 stands with different researchers presenting their most recent results. What would be the activity that would bring people to come and talk to you rather than talking to some of the other investigators that are there at the activity? So that's something that people need to think about. Related to that, I can make some suggestions. These are from the experimental sciences, obviously. DIY mini volcanoes. You can do this very simply with baking soda, vinegar, food colouring, maybe building your own rocket, or getting the participants to try and build a rocket, see which can fly the furthest. DNA extraction can be done very simply. And other things such as insect discovery or paper plane competition. And it would be really interesting if people would like to put in the chat perhaps, or contribute to some hook activities that might be relevant for the social sciences and the humanities outreach activities. I don't know if anybody has any ideas related to that. You can contribute those now if you would. Are there any comments related to that, Vicky?
No, not yet. But I was actually thinking about that, coming from social science myself.
Okay.
It's not very usual to see social sciences and humanities researchers in these kinds of activities or events in general. So for us, studying and being young researchers, it's sometimes difficult to come up with ideas when we ourselves haven't seen other researchers showing their work in those scenarios.
Yeah, that is difficult, and I think it would be really nice, as we go forward, if we can, get some sort of bank of ideas, or people can think about this. And it's not just, I think this is really important on various levels. On the most absolutely basic level, I think this is important because the majority of our research is financed with public funds. So on one level, we have a responsibility to let society, whose taxes or other contributions are paid for our research, know what we're doing with that money that we've been given. So on that level, it's really important. On another level, it's important because now when we have the ministry project proposals, there is a section about how, what are the implications for society, what are the implications of this research that will be funded. So maybe the information that's put in those project proposals would be a starting point to design outreach activities, and thinking about how that might be taken forwards. But I agree, it's not so direct in the social sciences or in the humanities, but I still believe it's something important that we should be doing.
Yes, for sure. I don't know if we have here social sciences and humanities researchers in the room. So if you would like, maybe you don't have specific ideas to develop, but you have found these difficulties when trying to translate your research into dissemination for the general public?
Maybe we can use our friendly chat GPT to help us in this. For example, in the English course I'm teaching at the moment at the University of Granada, we were talking about this last week, and one of the researchers is working on breast cancer nutrition related to post-operative breast cancer patients. And that's probably a very difficult subject to deal with in research. So perhaps putting in ChatGPT, see what that would say, or your own research topic. What would be a good research activity to engage the public? What would be a good outreach activity related to, and then specify your particular field of interest, field of research. So that's something that everybody could do. And see what it comes up with. It may come up with some useful ideas, or you could look in Google, see what other people in your field are doing. But I think that, you know, we should, and presumably if you've connected to this presentation, it's something that you're interested in. It's something that we should be thinking about. It's something we should be doing. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about planning. We've talked about what could be some approaches that we use. And then I just want to talk about feedback. And after the event has gone on, for the researchers or the volunteers involved, we can have unstructured feedback. And this might be as part of a WhatsApp group where people can just write comments related to what's gone in the day, what happened during the activity, what went well, what didn't go so well, what we might want to change. Or it can be done in a much more structured way to an online questionnaire. And I'll show you an example of one of those now as we go forwards. Of course, we want feedback from the participants as well, and we can either do this as a structured online questionnaire if we can get people to engage. These things clearly have to be very brief, something that people can complete in under 5 minutes if we're wanting them to give us some information about how we can improve. We've got more chance of them doing that if it's not too much of an effort for them to do it. We can have the polls, like I just mentioned, the polls that go on during the outreach activity, that can give us some feedback. We can also have somebody specifically asking for feedback at the event. So one of the researchers, one of the volunteers, actually interacting with the public, not in the sense of communicating research results, but actually collecting their perceptions of the activity. So that's something else that could be done, and that was done in our context in the Royal Society last year and worked really well. That was an idea that one of my colleagues had that worked really well. And we can get them to give feedback through QR code links as well, of course. So this was just an example designed by Bridie Davis and Jenny Barkley, two colleagues of mine, for the activity we did. And it's the volunteer, so the actual people who are doing the outreach, reflective form. And we were asked what day we covered, where we were working, in what area of the exhibit. How did the panels help the participants understand the aims and the research we were presenting? How much did the participants enjoy the activity? What could be changed? What sort of questions were people asking? Was there any interaction that was particularly outstanding, and anything else you want to share? And this could be anonymous, or you could fill in your name on it. And so that just gave, in 5 minutes, we can look at how the activity could potentially be improved. And in a multi-day event, that can be done ongoing, or otherwise at the end of the event. But it's really important, particularly if we're dedicating time to this and we're thinking about those initial aims. How is the impact really being taken away by the public? And something for you to think of. I think I can assume people aren't going to jump in and respond to this at this point, but please do go away and think about it. What would be your key question to assess positive engagement. And of course, that's going to be related to the planning stage aims that you originally designed. Okay, here are some suggestions for getting positive feedback and getting informative feedback. You really want to avoid questions that just have yes, no answers. So I'm not going to read all these out, but for getting feedback from the researchers or the volunteers, you might ask them what clarification did the participants seek regarding information that was being provided. So that might give an indication of what actually wasn't clear or what needs to be explained in a different way. How did the participants actively involve? How were they actually involved in the activity? Did they demonstrate understanding of the key concepts? Was there any application of the knowledge or the skills that they obtained, maybe to something related to their own daily lives, some sort of relationship between the two? And did the participants reflect at all on the learning experience? So these are the sort of things you can ask the people that are, the researchers that are doing the outreach. The sort of questions that you might include when you're trying to obtain feedback from the participants would be, what did you find most interesting? How did you approach the solving the challenges in the activity? Have you explored any ideas further related to what you saw during the outreach? Can you relate it to anything in your daily life? And how has it impacted your overall interest in science or in humanities or in social science, whatever it might be? And then a final question that often produces some interesting information is, what surprised you most about the activity or the topic it explored? So again, there are just some questions that don't just have yes or no answers. They require people to expand a bit on how they experience the outreach activity. Reflection. Okay, so we've got the feedback, and then we want to reflect on what was the impact and the effectiveness of the outreach event that we've done. So to do this, obviously it's important because you've already asked people to dedicate time to planning the outreach event, to actually undertaking the outreach event, and then giving the feedback. So we need the reflection to be really worthwhile for them to engage further and moving forward, think how we can improve. So it's key to schedule either an online or an in-person meeting, and to ask people to consider the impact both in a short, medium, and long-term context. The reflections can be quantitative. For example, you can measure the number of people that attended the actual event, the information that's provided in feedback questionnaires, or some sort of other indication of an increase in knowledge related to the activity. Or they can be qualitative, assessing people's changes in attitudes, changes in opinions, and that's related back to this volunteer participant that actually interacts with the participants in the research as well. So that can be approached in either of those or both of those two ways. And I've just shared here a work that's in progress by colleagues who participated in the Summer of Science Sensing Volcanoes activity last year, a paper that's been written on the reflection related to the activity, and it's called Crossing Boundaries, an interdisciplinary process for public engagement and how we understand volcanic eruptions and their intersection with society. And that's a work that's currently in progress. It's being led by Bridie Davis and Jenny Barkley, David Pyle. And when that's finished, I can make that available to people so they can see how that's structured in terms of defining the aims, what went on during the activity and what happened after the activity, and how that tells us about what we wanted to know in that context. And this is the fundamental question in this respect. How will the reflective process aid future outreach activities? So that's something to take forward, to take away and think about. Okay, so we come to the end of what I was wanting to share with you today. And the question, so what? Adapt the information presented to your own outreach. And I'd like us just to have some time here at the end of the session. We've got an hour, so 5-10 minutes thinking about, and maybe if you're attending this as part of a group, discussing your research to decide which is the most interesting aspect of your research results that you could present as an outreach event to the general public, and how you would go about doing that. So I really would like some interaction with the group on this point. I'm going to give you some time to think about this. You can ask questions, you can write in the chat, but report back to us about what you would choose to present and how you think you would go about presenting that to the general public. So that's something we're going to do now. Is that okay, Vicky, if we give people five minutes, maybe 10 minutes is a bit long to think about this and then come back with some ideas?
Sure, we have a few more minutes, so we can do that right now, no problem.
I'd be quite interested to hear a little bit more from Julia, I think it was, that said her tattoo outreach, how she connects and engages with the public related to that.
Yeah, hello again.
Hi.
I usually go anywhere they invite me to, if I'm honest. So, for example, I've been doing some speaks at bookshops, and then also tattoo conventions, because my research focuses on the history of women and queer people in Spain, related to tattooing, and it's very unknown and especially invisible. So for me, it is really important that I do not only publish academic stuff, but that I also engage with society, because otherwise I think the results of my research would just, stay invisible. And I mainly work with interviews and ethnographic methodologies. So I actually communicate the words and experiences and lives of these women and queer people, the protagonists. And I'm also in contact with them, so that I give them feedback. It's not just that I take the data and leave, but I try to stay in contact, avoiding extractivism. So it's been really, really important for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point, isn't it? It's a two-way conversation. It's not just we're there preaching to the general public.
Exactly.
And you mentioned bookshops, and that reminded me, we shouldn't forget about sort of pop-up outreach opportunities. Whether if we're in a taxi and the taxi driver asks us about what we do, or we're on a plane with somebody at a family meal, these are all opportunities for improvised outreach as well. Thanks for sharing that, Julia.
Thank you.
I was thinking that also those pop-up situations you mentioned, Jane, are good opportunities to come up with our own ideas to then present to a larger audience, because maybe those family members, the people we meet in the street, they have very specific doubts, or their questions, their suggestions can be very useful to take to then events, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And also to think about refining our message. I think everybody should have what's called an elevator pitch for their research and what they work on. This sort of 2 or 3 minute spiel that we can explain to somebody very quickly what it is we're working on and why we're working on it. So yeah, that's a good opportunity to do that. Absolutely. Okay. Any other comments in the chat there, Vicky?
No, not yet.
Okay. We need to activate ourselves, I think. Okay, so I think I'll end it there. That's really what I wanted to share with you about what my experience, some of my experiences have been, the importance of planning, some ideas for effective approaches for principally engaging and including people from a wide range of backgrounds, and also effective approaches for engagement and communication. And then thinking about the importance of feedback and reflection, either during or after the actual event, so that future events can be improved. That's it, really. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you all for being here today. So we'll have a second. Oh, they are saying thank you on the chat. We'll have a second opportunity to meet next Sunday, and hopefully make the course a bit more interactive, so that you can ask questions or comment on the difficulties you find when trying to reach out to the larger public. And that will be next Friday, the 19th, at the same timetable. So
thanks, Vicky. Yeah, so I put up my email there. So if you'd like to participate in that and present some of your own, have the opportunity to practice presenting some of your own research results, please email me.
That's great. Thank you all.
Thanks.
See you next time.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.